Hi, my name is Carlsruh Francom, and I'm pleased to present this paper to you, co-authored by Dr. José Gutiérrez, entitled White Intellectual Alibis in Use, a Critical Analysis of Pre-Service Teachers' Rhetoric. The root issue that necessitates a study into white teachers' rhetoric is the fact that U.S. schools continue to be sites of disenfranchisement for people of color. White teachers proportionally outnumber students of color. Teachers' daily practices are often implicitly racist. And in math, it can be especially difficult to see whiteness because it hides behind narratives of neutrality, intelligence, and meritocracy. Can teachers' daily interactions with students have any impact on centuries of inequality in U.S. education? We contend that it's the individuals within racist systems and their individual practices that can either re-script existing narratives or challenge them. Teachers are individuals at the ground level of these systems. Teacher education programs are potential sites to address these issues, but even within programs that are dedicated to social justice issues, there continues to be disconnects between anti-racist education and teacher practices. This is where our work with pre-service teacher discourse comes in. By examining pre-service teachers' responses and reactions during a racialized discussion, we can see how white subjectivities are enacted. In practice, these sorts of analyses could inform teacher educators as they design and implement anti-racist education. Our analysis is done through the theoretical lens of Leonardo and Zimbalas's white intellectual alibis. These alibis are discursive moves that whites use to prove their innocence when faced with the possibility of their own racism. A white intellectual alibi functions like an alibi in a legal setting. It's a spatial metaphor. I can't be in two places at once, so if I'm accused of being racist, I provide my alibi. This can take many forms, like my best friend is black, so how can I be a racist? Or I don't see race, so how could I be a racist? It creates a racist binary. There are racists and non-racists in this binary, and it omits what we know is the reality that people can espouse anti-racist views and still contribute to racism through their words and practices. So this functions this way. Once I've provided my alibi, I'm innocent, and further discussion of my implicitness in racist practices is silenced. In this way, racism proceeds unchecked, and internalized messages about white superiority are perpetrated rather than investigated and challenged. In other words, acting anti-racist take precedence over advocating for anti-racist practices. The data presented in this study are from a pair interview with two pre-service teachers, Abby and Sarah, who were in our university's elementary teacher education program. Both of them identified as white and female. I conducted the interview, and I also identify as white and female. I understand that my own work as a white teacher has been problematic, and am also learning how to confront and challenge my own racism. During the interview, I presented Abby and Sarah with hypothetical teaching scenarios and then prompted them to discuss the scenarios. Hypothetical teaching scenarios are meant to approximate real classroom interactions. Now I'm going to show you the two hypothetical teaching scenarios which connect to the data analysis in this paper. Abby and Sarah were first presented with this scenario. Imagine you are teaching a 5th grade math class. One of your students asks to talk privately, and you agree to meet with them. They start the conversation as following. I don't know how to say this, but it seems like you only call on the same 3 white students to show their work at the board when we're doing math. And I have my hand up too, but you never call on me. What's up with that? After reading this, Abby and Sarah were prompted to imagine how they might respond to the students, then write and discuss their responses. Afterward, I presented Abby and Sarah with this scenario. Imagine the same student and a teacher had the following conversation after the student shares the same concern. Teacher says, I'm so sorry you feel this way. I never meant for this to happen. I will try and call on students more fairly in the future. Student, thanks, that's cool. I don't think it's just that I feel this way though. I notice the same thing happening with my friends or at the store. I just feel invisible sometimes. I just want white people to admit that they treat me this way. Well, again, I'm sorry you feel this way. Not every white person treats you this way. I care for all my students. I can't control your friends or people at the store, but I can control what I do in my classroom. Okay, thanks. After reading this scenario, I asked them to discuss their thoughts about the teacher's responses. The interview was video and audio recorded and transcribed, and I used critical discourse analysis methods while looking for common themes, silences, and hidden meanings of the data. You can look at our paper for more details about our methodologies, including the way that we created these hypothetical teaching scenarios. For this paper, I highlight 3 of the white intellectual alibis that Abby and Sarah consistently employed. The strategic problem-solving teacher, well, life isn't fair, and I'm not like bad racist others. First, the strategic problem-solving teacher alibi. We know that solving problems and fixing things is generally considered an important part of a teacher's job. However, in our data, we saw that when Abby and Sarah used pedagogies and classroom practices, they often did so in order to exonerate themselves from exploring possible racist practices or from participating in further discussions of race. Oftentimes they wanted to fix the problem, but didn't necessarily discuss it in terms of race. Sometimes they brought up pedagogies like pulling sticks. And sometimes they tried to involve the student in fixing the problem. So, do you have a solution? How can I fix this for you? We see that Abby and Sarah cannot be in 2 places at once. With strong pedagogies and classroom management skills, they preclude themselves from committing a racist crime and interrogating potential racism or biases. The second alibi is, well, life isn't fair. We know that life isn't fair. This is true. We can't control every aspect of a student's life. However, in this data, we see that when Abby and Sarah say life isn't fair or a version of it, they put an end to possible discussions of racism. They talk about how they can't control every aspect of students' life. They can't go everywhere and make sure everybody treats them fairly. They talk about how life is a battle. You're not going to win every battle. There's going to be really hard things to deal with in life. Abby and Sarah assume the fact that life isn't fair and the fact that racism exists are mutually exclusive events. Racism doesn't coexist with the fact that life is, in general, unjust and hard in their discourse. These 2 ideas could not occupy the same space at the same time. Finally, the last alibi, I'm not like bad racist others. This alibi is a perfect illustration of the spatial binary. The defendant either has, quote, good behavior and is not capable of committing the crime of racism, or, quote, bad behavior and is likely to be a racist. We need to be above, quote, those people, Sarah said at one point. In responding to the teacher in the second scenario, Abby says, I hate the comment, I'm sorry you feel this way. This last comment by Abby is telling because Abby's own apology after the first scenario was very similar. She said, I'm so sorry if that made you feel, if it made you think that I never call on you. How does this alibi function? Well, Abby and Sarah spoke as though the teacher's response was racially motivated, whereas they projected their own motivations as unintentional, creating a non-racist alibi while distancing themselves from the racist other white person in this scenario. I'll briefly summarize and discuss these findings. First, I'd like to make a disclaimer. We're aware that this rhetoric and dialogue could be viewed from any number of CRT and whiteness theory lenses. The lens of white intellectual alibis provides another vantage point to discuss these issues. It can really drive home this idea of innocence versus guilt when it comes to racism. From this analysis, we see that the participants carefully managed their image as non-racist. They were primarily concerned with proving their innocence to themselves and the hypothetical student through the use of alibis. We suggest the growing list of white intellectual alibis in teacher education might be expanded to include those in our finding. This is a call to white educators like me to interrogate the white intellectual alibis we use that allow us to excuse ourselves from possible racist practices. Another point of discussion is that these data show that teacher educators must carefully consider design that nudges participants to explore issues of racism more directly. Otherwise, whiteness may continue to have a primary role when pre-service teachers are engaging in activities such as hypothetical teaching scenarios. Several limitations and extensions are listed in our paper, but for the sake of time, I'll just mention that we think there are many variations of this scenario that could touch upon specific issues concerning race in teacher education and math education specifically. Thank you so much. If you have questions or comments, feel free to email me. I appreciate your time.